Okay, pause. Can you name 5 things that you can see right now? 4 things that you can hear right now? 3 things you can feel right now? 2 things you can smell right now? And 1 thing that you can taste right now? That was the advice that my therapist gave me to help me deal with panic attacks that I've had throughout my life resulting from an anxiety disorder as well as from just exposure to certain stressful situations or anxiety inducing situations. I've been on this planet for nearly 4 decades now, and I'm not ashamed to admit that it hasn't always been easy for me. One of the best things that I've ever done for myself was to stop being so arrogant about my mental health, thinking that I was in control of everything that was happening to me and everything that I was experiencing, and to stop being in denial about the anxiety that I was experiencing, to sort of face that. And I started developing tactics and strategies with the help of things I've read and people I've talked to in order to make my experience of life, which I really hope is long for me, a lot more pleasant, and to be better at my job and the things that I choose to spend my time doing. So in this lecture, I'm going to be talking about strategies, and in the next few videos, I'm going to be talking about strategies that we can use in preparation for our speeches in order to reduce process anxiety, performance anxiety, and to better rehearse our speeches. So that will be the next few videos. In this video, I'm going to be talking about overcoming process anxiety, which is a phenomenon that's primarily occurring in our heads. It's a mental phenomenon. We'll focus on process anxiety now and then turn to the other issues in later videos. Communication apprehension in general is very common. People experience it all the time, especially when doing public speaking. We don't often, though, think about process anxiety. We tend to focus on what we call performance anxiety, the symptoms that occur while you're speaking. But process anxiety is different. It's a mental game primarily, and it occurs before the speech. So you may be exhibiting symptoms of process anxiety already. It's characterized by psychological dread, right? A feeling that something bad is coming, or a sense that you don't know how to proceed. So there's some dread that's experienced, as well as an inability to get started, or you're not motivated to begin. The good news here is that this is a mental process that's pretty normal, and it has various different causes. Most likely, if you're experiencing it, it's not necessarily being caused because you're a bad person, that you're inherently lazy or that you're a procrastinator. Studies show that most people procrastinate to some extent. That's not really the issue here. The issue here is that you are experiencing such psychological stress and you're not aware of it and you're being confused by it, that you're interpreting your inability to start as sort of a character flaw of yours. But it might not necessarily be that. So we need to be proactive, and then maybe we'll start viewing ourselves as a little different. I'm not lazy. I'm not a procrastinator. I just suffer sometimes from process anxiety. And that's really the first step of dealing with process anxiety, which is something that folks have been calling a lot these days mindfulness, right? And this comes to us from Buddhist meditative practices. And it's really our first line of defense against process anxiety. If you're suffering from process anxiety, you're having thoughts and feelings likely that are negative. And so becoming consciously aware of those negative thoughts and feelings around the public speaking process, putting together your assignment here, is the first step in mindfulness. So start hearing the thoughts that you have about this class and the project that you're engaged in. Further, once you start being consciously aware of this, you need to start hearing those thoughts, actually paying attention to them, active listening to your own mind and thoughts. Sometimes we just have thoughts racing through our heads. They affect us, but we're not really that consciously aware of that process. So hearing your thoughts is the first step, and then name those thoughts. Are they negative? Are you consistently speaking poorly about yourself or about the things you're engaged in? And if you are, then you got to learn to sort of distance yourself from those thoughts. As we might say in meditation, you are not your thoughts, right? Thoughts are things that you produce, but you are not the thoughts themselves. Your thoughts don't name you or know you better, than your collective experience would. So distance yourself from those thoughts. You're not your thoughts. And then the last step would be to try to actively, with some effort, replace those negative thoughts with more positive thoughts. So let me just tell a little silly story about how mindfulness has benefited me. I started playing Fortnite. Maybe you're familiar with that video game. And I started playing because my nephew promised he would play online multiplayer with me, but of course he's too busy playing soccer. So anyways, I've just been playing on my own, and I've noticed that sometimes I'm good at the game and sometimes I'm not as good at the game. And when I get frustrated, I have a tendency, let's say I get eliminated from a round, I have a tendency to sort of have the first thought be, oh man, I really, really suck at this, right? So that's the first step, is for me to be kind of consciously aware of this pattern. When I get frustrated, I tend to have thoughts like, oh man, I really suck at this game. So I start hearing those thoughts, and then I got to categorize those thoughts, right? That's a negative thought. That's not something that's going to be helpful for me to have floating around my mind. It's generally a thought that's associated with the feelings of being frustrated and eliminated from the game. So I tend to think these thoughts when this type of thing happens, right? So I'm naming the thoughts in the situation, and then I'm distancing myself from those thoughts, right? Just because I think I suck doesn't mean I actually suck at the game, right? I have a lot of evidence to show me that that's not always true. And so I can actively start to think more positively, and I will when I'm playing the game. I'll say, you can do this, you got this. Or I'll say something like, you're not focusing very much right now. You're always better when you focus. So kind of positive thought there. You're always better when you focus. Why don't you focus? Okay, so that's mindfulness, and that can be a very, very important strategy. This is, honestly something, I don't want to be too dramatic here, but that could save your life, right? If you want to live a long time and you want that to be a pleasant experience, mindfulness is probably one of the best pieces of advice anybody could ever give you. Okay, enough on that. Let's get a little more specific in terms of what's involved in the public speaking process. Because I would say my next piece of advice is that you should trust, and it's helpful if you're going to trust the process to try to develop a good understanding of the process. And the good news is that's what we're doing here in this class. We're simulating several public speaking experiences. They're just for play, right? This is like a laboratory in order for you to gain some more trust in the process and do that through having a good understanding of it. And the good news is that we've been doing this for thousands of years, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are plenty of traditions and processes and heuristics that we can draw from. Here's two dead guys, Cicero and Aristotle. And in fact, one of the things that they did for us a long, long time ago was really lay out what the basic process or what we should pay attention to and study when we're becoming good public speakers. And this is called the canons of rhetoric. The canons of rhetoric literally would mean the great works on rhetoric. So these were all the subject areas that the ancient Greeks and Romans wrote about primarily throughout the classical period of rhetoric in the Western tradition. So I just want you to conceive of these as kind of broadly the basic 5 steps, roughly in the order in which you would give them priority for crafting and delivering a public speech. I say roughly in order because you'll jump around through these things. Remember the idea of the iterative process that was discussed in our textbook, where we sometimes got to go back and revise our thesis when we've finished working on the style of the words in our speech. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through these, and you just use these as kind of the basic order of what you should give attention to when you're crafting your speeches. The first concerns are invention. This is the researching, brainstorming, coming up with what are the possible things that I could say given my purpose, my audience, and my situation, right, that I find myself in. So what is my purpose? What is the main idea I wish to express? What are some supporting materials I can find to help me express that main idea? This is gathering. And so that's the first thing we should concern ourselves with. From there, we move into concerns of arrangement and selection of the materials that we've gathered. And we're going to study several strategies for how we should arrange our speeches. Right now, early on in the semester, we're just using basic introduction, body, and conclusion. We'll talk about ways to organize the main points of the body of our speeches later on. But for now, just know, first think of the things that you want to talk about, and then spend some time arranging those broad ideas into an effective order for your purposes. Once we have the ideas and their basic order, we might look more at the level of word choice and kind of editing for style. Style is concerns about how we express our ideas. So we want to spend some time editing at the level of word choice. Is this a good example? Is there a better example? Maybe I'll use a metaphor. This word is more vivid, more powerful. From there, we want to move towards building our memory. We've been building our memory, and as we arranged the speech, we've paid attention to a logical arrangement that will trigger our memories. But now we got to get it on our feet, start saying it out loud, putting the text into the body, working with note cards, developing those note cards, reducing the amount of text we use over time as we rehearse. And then delivery, of course, would be focusing on concerns of verbal and nonverbal delivery, fine-tuning our performance. So that's the basic process, right? And as long as you're spending time doing these things, you will produce a great final product, okay? You just have to trust and understand the process. And that will reduce some of your anxiety. You'll know the direction that you want to go in. And finally, my last piece of advice it deals with this idea of not being overwhelmed by the final product. A lot of times we want to imagine what it's already going to look like before we've done the work. That imagining can be useful in certain ways, but it can also be anxiety-inducing. So in addition to sort of having some vision of the end product, we also need to realize that we're involved in a process, and that process is simply a series of actions. And those actions, doing them in an order, right? You can't do them all at once. In some order is what leads us to the final result. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were working on it like every day, right? So one of my favorite books on writing is titled Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, and she tells an anecdote in here about her son having trouble with a science report on birds, and her piece of advice was, just take it bird by bird. So the next action means focusing on what's next, right? And that should be your primary concern, not the final product. So what makes a good next action? We might think about SMART actions, or what are sometimes called SMART goals. And I'll just give you a quick rundown of what it's like to develop some SMART goals. A SMART goal is first specific. S is for specific. Having a goal like, I'm going to brainstorm, is not very specific. It's too general. It doesn't give you a lot of guidance. It's much better to say something along the lines of, I'm going to brainstorm specific groups and communities that I belong to. All right, that would be a good goal for speech number 1, brainstorming, something you want to do early on in your process. Additionally, these should be measurable actions, right? Finish my speech, is a little too ambitious or broad. Excuse me, I jumped ahead a second. A good example of a measurable goal would be, I'm going to edit my thesis in order to reduce the number of words in it, right? Make it clearer and more direct, all right? That's a measurable outcome. I have 40 words in my thesis. I want to get it to something less than 40 after I'm done editing. So that's a good measurable goal. I'm going to research, and I'm going to find 10 sources that support my claim that there's some sort of problem. So that's specific and measurable. It also should be achievable. So this is where I jumped ahead here. A goal like finish my speech today, right, might not be achievable. That is a insurmountable or you shouldn't expect that, right? Pass the class. It's too general. It is achievable to pass the class, but not through a single action, right? So you got to do a lot of actions to pass the class. That wouldn't be a good next action. Please everybody in my audience. I want my speech to please everybody in my audience, right? That's not even possible. So that's not a good goal. Find all the primary source materials that are available, right? That's not an achievable goal. Okay, so make sure that it's something you can actually accomplish. It should be relevant to you, what you're doing, right? So make sure that you are working on things that you think are fun. Make it fun. Make it a game. Make it reward yourself so that if you accomplish the goal, you achieve something that you've wanted. Talk about stuff that matters, right? Follow your curiosity, follow your passions. Make what you do relevant to yourself and others. And then lastly, these should be timed goals, right? So make sure you put a finite time limit on your next action. I'm going to search for up to 10 news sources to support my claims that there's a problem for the next hour of my time. Right? That's a really great next action. Think in terms of next actions. If you need help kind of conceiving about what might be your next action, that's something you could ask on the Common Course question board, or depending on your situation, you could bring it to me directly. So that is the ways I think you can best prepare for process anxiety, which is mind your mind, right? Be mindful, start hearing how you think. Use the guides that are provided in particular. Think about the canons of rhetoric and check out other processes that are discussed in our textbook. And then make sure that you create SMART next actions that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed actions. Good luck. You got this.